Good morning, good afternoon, class. Um, Welcome to day three of doing online lectures, where I'm not actually in class. I'm just going to start, as usual, with a little bookkeeping. First, everyone's tests should be graded, and you should have seen those. I'm very pleased with how everyone did. I'd like to go over a couple of the questions I think people had issues with. It was the most commonly missed questions. Um, in the loop question where I had people's names. One of the names was Jeffrey, and if you noticed in your survey yesterday, I asked you to, how do you spell Jeffrey? Because if you spelled Jeffrey exactly like I spelled it in the problem, you'd get the right answer. And I assume if some people were working that problem on another sheet of paper, they mistranscribed Jeffrey, and I just assumed that's how people got it wrong. The other problem was in problem 17, I believe. It's where it referenced the functions like we did in class to do the area of a pentagon, a triangle, and a square. Um, the way the code was written, it was written with an intentional bug because we talked about it in class, where if you just have a string or a number that is in a logical comparison, that individual section always evaluates to true. So because that's always true, and there's an or in the middle of that statement, the entire statement is true, and that leads to the code never getting to the last elif to check for the pentagon. Um, so those are the two most common problems with the test. Um, if anybody else has any other things that they're worried about for the test, in further bookkeeping, I have good news. On Friday, I'm going to be in class. So, normal morning time at 10 o'clock, normal afternoon time at 2:30, I will be available and we will have a class meeting and we will go over questions about the homework and questions about the test. We'll do some group programming assignments just to keep everyone from being rusty and to make sure everyone's still good working with each other. Um, and we could talk about things that I discussed in the lecture today if anyone has any questions. But just a reminder, I'm going to be there. Um, Show up to class. Um, Another thing, I need to start being more strict about attendance. I realize that I'm doing things a little looser than I should be. So for uh, days I am absent, um, you need to email uh, Miss Elsmore at the beginning of class to say that you are present when I tell you that I'm going to be out. And if I'm also out on academic support days and I'm not able to immediately see, okay, hey, you checked in, you need to be emailing Miss Elsmore on time because if you don't, you're going to be uh, fighting for some form of an excused absence, and I don't want that to be the primary focus of anyone's day. So please do that and take care of that. Um, Even like though I give you the quizzes are like a second check. So it's something I want you to do, but you absolutely have to tell Miss Elsmore that you were or were not in class, and that has to be done at the beginning of the class time when that would meet. Um, for academic support days, when I'm not able to actually meet, but I ask you to do a quiz, um, you need to do that during that class, that academic support block. Um, you need to be doing anything I assign you if I'm not actually in class during the academics during that scheduled class time. Um, just for the sake of keeping everything on task. I've seen some people are like going and watching my lectures well like after the fact, but you need to be doing it during your class period. Um, and that's just how that's got to work out. Uh, because if I start having issues with how that starts getting reported, then we start having to have these conversations again and again, and nobody really wants to do that. So to recap, great job on the test. Very proud of you guys. Um, I will be in class on Friday, so come to class prepared to work, and be in class, do your things on time when I'm not here. That will minimize the stress for everybody if you just get it done when you're supposed to get it done. All right, cool. So your whole projects this week. I mean, we've been talking about dictionaries and files, and we're finally putting it together in Ciphers. And I'm going to talk about Ciphers today because I have a long-standing fascination with Ciphers. I've always you know, 400 years ago when I was a gifted kid, I tested highly because of my pattern recognition skills. So I've always liked to find the trends in things. I loved game shows, watching like Wheel of Fortune and trying to figure out puzzles before anyone else could. Um, and I think that led me to be really interested in ciphers and code cracking, as it were. So we're gonna run through this slideshow, and I'll bounce back and forth between this slideshow and some example codes so you can kind of see what these dictionaries look like that actually do this ciphering. Um, as we get to more complicated ciphers in this, I will not actually like have it coded up and show you how to do it, but I will talk through how it's supposed to work, and that's mostly when we get to some of the like higher level codes. Some of that is just far outside the realm of this class, but with the skills you've learned in this class, you could absolutely 100% code that up if you wanted to try it for yourself. Um, so I'm gonna think the F10 doesn't do. I think it's F5. There we go. Um, oh, gotta go back. It pops that up on a different. I don't like that. I don't like that it does that. I just want to view. So I want to view. If I go slideshow from beginning. I don't know why it puts it over there. Display settings. There we go. That's probably what I want. Yeah, there we go. So a brief history of ciphers. Um, so we'll start with like the ancient uses of cryptography. It dates back to about 1500 BC, when archaeologists and anthropologists have found clay tablets from early Mesopotamia. Um, then they discovered that the uh, hieroglyphs on those tablets encrypted a craftsman's recipe for pottery glaze. So greed runs deep, and people have been protecting trade secrets since the dawn of written language. So I thought that was kind of neat when I found that out. Um, 600 to 500 BC, Hebrew scholars made use of a simple monoalphabetic substitution cipher known as the Atbash cipher. This is the first cipher that I'm going to show you guys. Let's pop this over here. View, presentation mode. So the Atbash cipher takes a. Is there a way to expand that in presentation mode? I guess not. Alright, so I'm going to take it out of presentation mode. So the Atbash cipher takes an alphabet, and this could be any alphabet. The original Atbash cipher was with the Hebrew alphabet that only had 22 characters, but I have implemented here with the alphabet that we use, and so it's 26 characters, but it just takes an alphabet and it flips it. So A is Z, B is Y, C is X. And the way the easiest way to implement that is so I used dictionary comprehension to say that I wanted from string .ascii lowercase, I wanted it to traverse the list of those characters, and then I wanted to assign the value to that key to be that same string, but 25 minus I. So if I is 0, which is A, 25 minus I is 25, so that's Z. Um, because instead of there being 26 characters, I mean, there's still 26 characters, but you don't count, 1 to 26. You count 0 to 25. Hammering that home. So that's how you get at bash to go forward and backward like that. Um, and then the ancient Greeks, they were known to use something called the Cytale transposition cipher. So instead of a substitution cipher, which is what we've really been talking about to this point, and it's what you'll most commonly use a dictionary for, a transposition cipher, the way that the Greeks did it was this rod right here. They would wrap a ribbon around it and then turn it sideways and write the message that they had on that ribbon. And then they would send the ribbon to whoever they wanted to send it to. And unless you had a rod that was exactly the same diameter as the rod used to write the message, the letters would never line up the way they were supposed to. So that's how the Greeks did it. I would think, it's kind of weird that that's how they were hoping to get it done. That there was that's a very mechanical encryption. That you had to have a tool, a physical tool, to decrypt the information. Um, and that's the other more common that I think and more useful encryption tool invented by the ancient Greeks was the Polybius square. Um, so in higher level concepts such as information theory, it's important to be able to take a character and represent that character as numbers, um, because that greatly increases the ability to communicate when you only have binary signaling where you have zeros and ones. So this table is an example of the Polybius square. It is a 5 by 5 table where A is equal to 11, G is equal to 22, M is equal to 32, so it goes row then column. So there's 26 letters in our alphabet. So they stick I and J together. I think it was decided to do it that way because I and J are uncommon letters compared to the other ones, or they looked the same. So even if you wrote it wrong, if you read it, it probably looked like the letter it was supposed to be if I had to interpret why they would have done it that way. And I will now show you code, why, like how easy it is to implement the Polybius square into a cipher. Um, but as I'm saying that, I want to tell you that it's really important because in ancient Greece they used flame signaling for a lot of things, and all they had were, okay, flame up, we're being attacked. Flame down, okay, we're not being attacked. But now, if they had sets of torches, and if they put up like 3 and 5, that can mean an exact different code than if they put up 1 and 2. Um, so that led to, with sequences of torch lighting, you could communicate much more complicated messages over time, and that's the basis of a science known as information theory. And if you guys go to college, you start studying electrical and computer engineering, computer science, because I know you're all inspired after taking this class with me. You'll likely find yourself taking courses on information theory if you are ever interested in like encryption or uh, data encoding. So this is the Polybius cipher. Um, the so the way you break it down is you have rows and columns, and this is one of the few times you'll ever see me start counting at 1. Um, because the 1 is how you actually encode it in the Polybius square. It does not include a 0. So what I do is I traversed the characters in string.ASCII uppercase. and took the key. So um, for the key to be equal to the numbers, so this is important for the decoder. Um, I took each I took the row and the column and I cast it as a string, and then I added them together, because when you add strings, it's concatenation. So if I know I was in the second column, well, I was in the second row in the fifth column, I would have the key be 2 5. Um, or in the case that and all this is only really important when the character is J, because J and I have to go together. So normally when you iterate through a for loop, each thing is different that you want to do. But this is a case where you have two values that are assigned to the same key. And a key can hold two values, but you cannot have um, a value with two keys. Like, I mean, I guess you can. It's just hard to separate out like that. Um, but either way, if you're doing it through a for loop, you can't like just repeat the spot you're on. So what I have it do is take the character coming through, and if it knows it's J, it just assigns that value the same value as I. And in the decoder, it knows when we've gotten to 24 that I make it equal to I/J. So if you were ever doing the encoding and decoding, you would actually print I/J in the decoding. Um, so I'll actually run through and kind of show you what the dictionary looks like of putting that together. So let's look at the Polybius cipher. Right. Okay, so we have A11, F21, I24, J24. So we know that both of those will translate to 24. But then the decode 24, we have I and J together, because that's just a byproduct hazard of having to do it that way. But maybe if Polybius could have found a cool polygon that would have allowed you to do a 6x6, well, not 6x6, but maybe some fancy pentagon, could have found a way to make 26 fit in a simpler way. In theory, you could do a 13 by 2 Polybius square. Yeah, it's actually like if you just wanted to do a substitution cipher however you wanted it. The Polybius square is actually just the most basic one. By breaking into a 5 by 5, you can really do it however you wanted to do it. So a 2 by 13 would be a valid Polybius square, except obviously not a Polybius square. Maybe we should call it a Polybius polygon at that point. The alliteration is kind of fun there. So you can teach that one to your friends. So later, we get into medieval cryptography. Like there are big gaps in time where no real advances are made in cryptography, but up until this point, all these ciphers are monoalphabetic substitution ciphers. So I have a set of 26 characters, and I translate them into 26 other characters that are one for one. But when you have a cipher like that, you can break it through a process called frequency analysis that was discovered by Al-Kindi, who is an Arabian mathematician. Um, so it's like if anyone's ever seen Wheel of Fortune, um, they always give you the 5 most common letters in the English alphabet. They give you R, S, T, L, N, E, and based on those letters, you can start to figure out where some things are. Like if you ever see a word that has a letter by itself, there are really only two instances in the English language where you ever have a word that is a letter by itself, and it is either A or I. And based on the frequency of how it appears in other words, you can determine if that's an A or an I. And very rarely do we have two letters that are the same right next to each other, except for in the case of like L in words like will, or T's are commonly together. Like if you were writing for war, you have the word battle together often. Um, and yeah, I mean, if you have like two vowels together, if you're looking for E's tend to come together when you have words like free. Um, and then there are letters that occur in pairs together. Like if you happen to find a Q, Q's and U's are often together. Um, so yeah, that's more or less what frequency analysis is. Um, because with the right amount of frequency analysis, you can break any monoalphabetic substitution cipher. The first polyalphabetic cipher was described by Giovan Battista Balazzo in 1553, and this polyalphabetic cipher was considered unbreakable for 3 centuries. Not until around 1860 was a work written that would break this cipher. Um, the cipher was misattributed to Blaise de Vigenère sometime in the 19th century. So the cipher that they actually came up with bears the name of Vigenère. Um, and what the cipher is it's 26 Caesar ciphers. So it's every possible Caesar cipher you can have, because after you shift past 26, you've shifted, all the way back, and you have the same alphabet again. Um, but the way you have multiple alphabets is that you have a keyword. And so your keyword is like, I'll actually use the example that I found on Wikipedia that I thought was really helpful when I was, learning how to do the Visionaire cipher. So this is a Visionaire table. Um, and so let's say you have the word attack, and your keyword is lemon. That's just it's an arbitrary word, but let's just say it's lemon. So I look at A, and then I need to go down to the key letter, which is L, and under L, A comes out to a L. So that's the first one, and then E. If you go over to T at the top, you get an X. So far our code is LX, and then there's another T, an attack, but then we go down to the M, and we have an F. So far we have LXF, and so on and so forth. So we go to the entirety of the word lemon, but the key so it's like, well, what do we do when we run out of letters in our keyword? Well, what you do is you repeat that keyword over and over again until you have made it through the entirety of your text. So this is where we talked about when you have a string, that you can multiply that string over and over again to just get more of that string together. That is what you would do if you had a keyword and you were using a cipher. If you were using this Visionaire cipher, is you would figure out the length of your keyword, and then figure out the length of your text, and then you could do an integer division, and then multiply your keyword by that number of iterations or instances. So if you knew your word went into your text 50 and some change times, you'd create 50 copies of that word back to back to back to back to back. And then you could do the modulus and figure out how much you have left over. And then at the very end, you tag on that remainder of letters. So it might not even be the complete keyword, but you have to tag that back onto the end. And you just go through the process. And this, because the cipher actually became keyword reliant, the most common way during this time to crack ciphers was to crack people. Um, the the weakest layer of security is always the personal level of it. Um, Computers won't normally just give up what's going on, but I imagine in this time, if you put someone's thumbs in the screws long enough, they would tell you what word it was that went through the cipher, so that you could, figure out what the queen and the king were up to, or you know, what the T in Spain was about. Um, so yeah, that was a big deal with cryptography in the medieval era. Um, and once we get out of the 1800s, we move into World War One, World War Two. Um, like I guess it's worth noting that when the Visionaire cipher was broken, it was highly published by Friedrich Kasiski um, through some thorough cryptanalysis, and I could probably spend a whole week talking about how you can break down polyalphabetic ciphers. The thing is, so you're still looking for patterns, but the actual mathematics behind it are based on how long your keyword is. And the longer your keyword is, the harder it is to crack the whole thing. And we'll get into that when we talk about more modern cryptography, because the length of the keyword starts to play a major importance in how modern cryptography is constructed. So uh, here's your history lesson. I'm sure everyone took American history at some point, or I think juniors take U.S. history. I'm not sure, but I think you will have learned about these events. Um, in 1917, um, the German embassy in the United States um, sent a telegram to the German embassy in Mexico, and that telegram was intercepted and decrypted, and that telegram, known as the Zimmerman telegram, was when it was Germany trying to get Mexico involved in World War One, and what they were offering was to give Mexico like Texas and Arizona, and they were going to give them like California back. That was like, hey, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. Take care of the U.S. for us so they don't get involved. Um, as you know, we were back-to-back World War champions, so obviously World War One did not go well for the Germans. Similarly, in World War Two, Germany was doing really well for a large portion of that war, and that was heavily, heavily due to their use of an electromechanical rotor machine known as Enigma. And Enigma would generate a random keyword and move about encrypting all of their messages for the day. And if you haven't seen the movie The Imitation Game, it stars Benedict Cumberbatch. It has Keira Knightley in it. It's a really great representation of what went on um, during this time, and it focuses on the team that was responsible for cracking Enigma in Britain. Um, Besides just being a great like human interest piece movie, because you actually get to see like some of the inner workings of Alan Turing's mind, like that it's historically fairly accurate to what happened. And just recently were we able to start getting some of that information about what really happened, because Britain had like a 50-year secrecy policy. So only recently did that information start coming out about how we actually got through that, because even after we cracked Enigma, we had to play along as though we hadn't in several situations. So because if we had completely cracked Germany's coding system, um, then they would have just scrapped it and they would have found some other way to encode their messages. So there were instances where um, brave young men were lost. But ultimately, we won World War II through the work of that team. Um, and post that, I mean, Alan Turing, he's the conceptual founder of modern computing. Um, the standard like qualifier for artificial intelligence is if it can pass what's called the Turing test. And if you're interested in AI, I highly encourage you to look more into that. But that's about all that I'm really going to say about that. Then you get to modern cryptography, and that's like really the advent of modern cryptography is where you start talking about asymmetric keys. So we know that in the polyalphabetic cipher, you go from, I can have this long word, or this long bit of text, and I just have a keyword, and that keyword is how I get that text to my ciphered text, and using that same keyword I can decipher. But asymmetric key ciphers use a different cipher going forward and backwards. And that's based on what's called what they later began to call it was a public key cipher, and it's how most of the internet actually works today. So your internet signature has what's called a public key, where your public key is known to everybody. But then there's a private key, and that private key is on the other side of a firewall. And based on your public key, the the institution that you're trying to validate yourself to will have a private key, and they will compare those two keys together and do a mathematical operation to form another key, and that key is how you actually move through um, several things on the internet, and that is where the adoption of what the secure socket layer internet paradigm is. So, like, when you're on the internet, if you don't see like you want to see that things you're working with have a like TLS security, and if they're using SSL, um, they're all things that ensure that your information is not just flowing out into the hands of people who wish harm on you. Um, so I say all this to say that you know technology moves incredibly fast now. Moore's law said that the density of transistors on a wafer doubles roughly 18 months, and doubling that means that you double the computation power. Um, Moore's law is held fairly tight for a long time, um, but because you have more brute force power, the old keys we had in the old encryption standards, actually just didn't stand the test of time. So, I mean, even though the mathematics behind those encryption standards were solid, um, we just have the computing power now that we can test keys. So, like, keys are keys are normally binary. So you have a series of zeros or ones. Um, and if you have, a five digit key, that means you have 2 to the 5th possible keys you can have. So that means you only have to try 32 keys to get the right one. Um, but the present gold standard for encryption is actually like AES 256, or at least that was the last gold standard that I really worked with. Nothing has really superseded that. Um, it was part of um, a national security competition that happened a long time ago. I think it was 2001. And these two Belgian cryptographers, Vincent Rijman and Joan Damon, submitted what was called the Rijndael block cipher for this, and it was determined to be the most computationally efficient and suitably unbreakable encryption standard of what was submitted. So, what AES 256 does, um, so let me start by saying 256 is in reference to the length of the key. There are other flavors of AES. So AES is a advanced encryption standard, and there's like 120 an AES 128. There's an AES 196, I think. But 256, just for an example, let's see. Let me see a calculator. So if I took 2 and I want to, let's go scientific calculator. I take 2 and I raise that to the 256th power. There are 1.15 times 10 to the 77. 10 to the 77. What? So 10 to the 6 is a million. 10 to the 9th is a billion. 10 to the 12th is a trillion. So this is easily six six magnitudes. Well, not even 6 magnitudes. Six. This is 60 magnitudes, greater than a trillion, or a quadrillion, whatever the last one I said was. So that's how many possible keys there are. And these keys are asymmetric in many of the cases. So even if you get the key going one way, you might not have the key coming back. Um, and this key is applied to a block size. So if you have a block size of text, it's actually a 128 block length. So you take 128. Normally it's so 128 bits of data, and you arrange it into this cube. And the steps of AES are so we've seen, at Caesar Cipher you just, shift things over, or, at Bash you flip them, or the Visionaire, you have a cipher that you go once, you find the next one, you go once, you find the next one, you go, and you just have a sequence of alphabets. This is like the Rubik's Cube of ciphering. So you start with a substitution step. So at the very heart of all ciphers, there's always a substitution step. There's always you flip one thing for another. So you substitute a set of the bytes um, in this block that you have formed, and then you shift them, and then you do a mixing stage, and then you add the key on top of it, and that works in like an XOR function. So if you have two ones, you get a zero. You get one and a zero, you get a one. Um, a lot of that may not sound like a lot, but that's going to be one of the questions in the quiz. So the result of an XOR function, if you have 0 and 0, you get 0. 1 and 1, you get 0. An XOR only evaluates to 1 if you have a 1 and a 0. It's an exclusive OR. You got invited to the party, but your friend did not. It's highly exclusive. Um, mm. So with that, we made it through all the way to modern cryptography. I think cryptography is just this millennia old puzzle game where it's one group of people trying to hide information from somebody else, and that group of people, really not wanting you to hide that information from them. So cryptography is the world's oldest cat and mouse game, if you don't count cats actually chasing mice, because I'm sure that's been happening a lot longer. Um, but I don't think anybody is going to, start walking to class and taking their hair ribbon and wrapping it around a pencil and writing codes on it. But it's highly reasonable that someone could, take a Visionaire cipher and start using that to, send secret messages to people. I mean, especially because once you master how the Visionaire cipher works, you get a real base example of the core of cryptography. The Visionaire cipher is at the core of modern cryptography, um, because that's really what started there being true mathematical complexity to what you could do. Um, so, just some reminders. I'm going to be in class tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you guys. It's weird to think, but I miss y'all. I look forward to being able to work in an environment with y'all again. So I hope you guys look forward to that as well. Um, so remember, for this class, you needed to email Miss Elmsmore to say that you were here, and then before this class period is over, complete the quiz, get it done. Um, so take care of that. Take care of each other. I will be on the road to Virginia today when you're doing this. But if you need to send me an email, I will have my phone on me. I can answer email. I'm going to download all your homeworks and grade that while my wife drives. So by the time I make it to the hotel room, I'll update everyone's grades. It's a 12-hour trip, so I should be able to get all my grading done. But with that, um, I wish you guys a happy Thursday, and I look forward to Friday. Y'all take care.